In this video, I'm going to show you how to mix and process sub-bass. In part 1 of this two-part video series, we looked at how to mix and process kicks. In this video, we'll focus on the bass. The kick and the bass is arguably two of the most important elements in your mix. Together, they make up the very foundation of your track. They also provide most of the energy, so it's important that these elements sit just right in the mix. A common mistake is to boost the low end too much. The fact of the matter is that oftentimes you actually have to take a lot of low end out instead. The average studio monitor can't reproduce those ultra-low frequencies. In fact, many monitors can't reproduce anything below 50 Hz. Because of this, it's tempting to boost the low end thinking there's too little of it. When the mix is played on a larger system later on though, or in your car, you'll notice that there's way too much low end. This is a common scenario. In order to really hear the frequencies below 50 Hz, monitors with larger cones will be needed, or a supplementary subwoofer. So let's load an EQ and make a cut somewhere between 30 and 50 Hz. This will depend on the genre, the sound itself, and how deep the kick is, as well as what else is in the mix. In this case, we have a kick that goes almost all the way down, so I'll roll it off around 40 Hz. Because this is a sub-bass, we only need the low frequencies. The next thing I'm going to do is to make the bass mono, just like the kick. It's very important that the low end is consistent and that it comes out of both speakers exactly at the same time. If you want to know more about this, then check out our other video about the importance of mono in your mix. You can find the link to the video in the description below. To make the bass mono, just turn the knob all the way to the right. Now both channels are fully merged. If I turn it the other way, it does the opposite, adding more stereo separation. If you're using just one bass with higher frequencies still present, then you'll typically want to put everything below, say, 100 Hz or so in mono, and everything else remains in stereo. To do that, you could use Maximus, but it's not included in all versions of FL Studio. TP Bassline is a free alternative and also very easy to use. Just turn this knob. Now everything below 100 Hz will be in mono. I recommend using this if you have just one bass sound and if you want to tighten up the low end while having the higher frequencies in stereo. But in this video we're using sub-bass and we just want it to be 100% mono, so I'll just delete this. Let's move on. As I talked about in the previous video, there's a sweet spot in the 60 and 80 Hz region. Many hi-fi manufacturers tend to boost these frequencies in order to make their speakers sound good. Next, I'm going to load a Waves plugin called RBass. This plugin gives a massive boost to the low end by adding extra harmonics. The stock setting is 80 Hz, which often works quite well, but you might have to change it depending on the key of your track and the sound itself. If you Google frequencies of musical notes, you'll find information about the frequency of each note. Our bass is F, and as you can see, the fundamental frequency for F is 87.3 Hz. It can only be set to whole numbers, so the closest thing will be 87 Hz. There are many plugins like this, including some free ones. Note that this isn't always necessary. You should only use this if you feel that the bass is lacking in some way. Next, we're going to look at compression. Compression is very important when it comes to bass. Bass is usually not very consistent. The intensity can change a lot from note to note, so it will often be a bit all over the place, as you can see here. To make it worse, our hearing isn't very sensitive to low-frequency sounds to begin with. It's not linear, so the way we perceive low frequencies can change dramatically depending on the frequency. By compressing the bass, we'll be able to make it more consistent overall. This will help each note play back at a more equal level. Unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly what settings to use because this will depend on the sound itself. Every situation is unique. I'm just going to move the compressor up by using the scroll wheel on the mouse. The order of the processing is very important. Next, I'm going to load an EQ. This EQ will allow me to do some very precise surgical EQ. The peaks you see here are fundamental frequencies that determines the note. We're in the scale of F minor, so let's go hunt for frequencies that are not in that scale. This one is quite small, but it's very close to that 80 Hz sweet spot, so I'm just going to take some of that out. A is not in the scale either. This looks quite good so far. Next, let's find F and boost those frequencies a bit. It can be easier to load a separate EQ for this. The process can be quite tedious, but it will make your bass sound more in key with the track overall and make it sit better in the mix. The last thing we're going to look at is sidechaining. We don't want the kick and the bass to overlap. If that happens, the low end will sound muddy and muffled. Since this is a standard 4-on-the-floor beat, we can use plugins such as LFO Tool, Kickstart, and so on. You can of course use old-school sidechaining if you prefer that. In modern dance music, just about everything tends to be sidechained to a degree. Unless you're using sidechain as an effect, a good rule of thumb is to use heavier sidechaining the lower the frequency. On a sub-bass, you will typically want to sidechain very aggressively, like this. As you get higher up in the frequency spectrum, you can apply less and less sidechain. If you own the LFO tool, you can turn on this button to display the waveform. This can be helpful when determining the curves. For example, I could now apply LFO tool to my kick as well and invert the curve. Now I can visually see where I need to cut the kick and where the bass needs to come in. This is basically what we did with the envelope for the kick in the first video, except this gives you a much better visual representation of what's going on. Keep in mind that when you add processing to your bass, or any other sound for that matter, the volume will often change, so you might have to adjust the volume when you're done. The sub-bass should usually not be louder than the kick. If you haven't seen the first video about how to mix and process kicks, I recommend you check it out now. You can find the link in the description below, as well as some links to some other really helpful videos, like how to use old school sidechain, 5 ways to sidechain in FL Studio, and so on. I'd like to thank our Patreons for their ongoing support, and as always, if there's any specific tutorial you'd like us to make, or if you have a question, just let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.